I love bands like this. I love bands that are a little bit more accessible, a little bit more easier to the ears in terms of comprehension, but really grab you and really hook you with something completely different. It's really easy to follow the same formula over and over and over again. It's really hard to inject something new within the musical landscape, and luckily that's what we have here. Let's dive in. Oracle by Mayra's Orchestra. So Mayra's Orchestra got its start earlier this decade, in 2013, with their first release. I didn't get a chance to listen to it because I was actually introduced with this album by the drummer, Christian Brun. He's the mastermind behind Chris with The City of Lights, as well as Days of Summer Gone. He's also the mastermind behind the Black Codex and the recent Invention series that I'm a Patreon for. And each of his works I love and I really connect with, so I was very excited to hear what he was going to do with this band. So Mayra's Orchestra is kind of labeled as a cinematic pop, or almost like an orchestral pop. They don't really use a whole lot of synthetic or synthesized sounds. Most of their musical instruments are classical instruments such as trumpets, violins, harps, strings, those types of instruments, and only very rarely are we getting instruments such as the guitars or synthesizers or something like that. And when they are, it's either very, very subtly used or just used in the backgrounds. It's never the forefront. The forefront is definitely the lead singer. And I apologize, I know I'm going to butcher the name of Marci Decker, and I really hope I pronounced that right. She is the lead soul here. She's the lead vocalist and kind of the singer-songwriter here. And unlike a lot of singer-songwriters within the female presence within the musical landscape, she's not using the zeitgeist of the time. I saw this vine.
Welcome to my kitchen. We have bananas and avocado.
And suddenly all the female singer-songwriters, I realized, started to sound like that. I guess that kind of was the zeitgeist that Sia really brought to the forefront, and now there's a lot of imitators, and it's the flavor of the times right now. And I'm glad that that's not the case on this particular singer. Her vocals are haunting. And that's the best way that I can really describe this overall album, is that it is just very, very haunting. It feels like as I'm listening to it, I'm being introduced to this alien life form that's very, very intelligent, but also very hesitant and weary. Like, it's coming out of the shadows, it's coming out of the woodworks, and it's either, like, the overall flavor is more of like a woodland creature, so a very intelligent, say, woodland spirit coming out and recognizing me, and I recognizing it. That's the best way I can really describe the sound and the feelings that I'm hearing on this album. So diving into the actual music that we found on here, I've already described kind of how it's flavored, and it's also a mix between dark and light. Like, the overall padding for this sound is very dark, with using a lot of like minor keys within the horns and the violins, but it's also very optimistic with being more of a poppy approach. And this is definitely found within the first couple of tracks of Dawn, Home is Where the Heart Is, as well as A New Skin. So those first three songs really open up the album. And Dawn is, when I was first listening to this, I was expecting this song to kind of end short many, many times. And I'm so glad that they really explored the territory. This song is itching around the 3.5 minute mark, and I love that it lasts this long. It's a typical kind of an introduction song, but what they do is they use a lot of builds, and they build upon the builds. So you're really discovering the landscape in that sense. And I'm very, very glad that it didn't just stop here, because each time I was listening to this, I kept thinking, I hope that they develop this sound more, because I'm very used to a lot of these songs just stopping short. So I'm glad that they continued on with that. Home is Where the Heart Is really the introduction to A New Skin. That's where I'm really starting to connect with her vocals, and it's really coming into my whole being, like that soul, and it's really penetrating. So the lead single off of this is The Face in the Water, and it's at this point that I'm realizing a lot of these songs feel very poppy, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm listening to this and I'm thinking very much like I've heard something like this from, say, a Taylor Swift, especially with that first song of Dawn. I'm going to go back to Dawn for a second. Just the first couple of notes, it sounds very much like Red, like that Taylor Swift song of Red. There's something in the note progression and that 4-chord kind of structure that really recognizes that. And that's also found within Face in the Water. It's the typical kind of pop presentation of songs in that we've got the 4-note progression going through most of the song within the chorus, verse, and chorus. But it's not really a drawback because everything that's being presented is very fresh and very new. Face in the Water definitely proves that, and I love where this song goes. I like that there's a lot of ebb and flow within this song. It's not just a straight up pop song in that respects. Even if you did strip out the orchestra sound and put in more of the synthesized noise, it's still, the construct of the song is still very organic and very fresh and very new. We have this really great kind of breakdown near the middle part, and when it gets built up again, it's breathed with new life.
I saw your face in the water.
I also love how each of these songs have a completely different personality, even though they're playing in that same atmosphere. The next couple of songs, such as In Your Heart, Edge of the World, and Run, each of these songs have their own feeling, but it's still within that world. It's like I'm meeting a new creature from this woodland forest. I guess that's the best way I can kind of describe this. Into Your Heart is definitely a more somber and much more humble song. It's very intimate. Like, I feel one-on-one with the lead singer there. But then when we come into Edge of Your World, it's much more bombastic and much more kind of on edge. And Edge of the World, this is definitely where I was talking, where the landscape felt very dark and very almost not quite sinister, but just dark. The padding of the song with the horns, and within that, it's providing such a really interesting atmosphere. And this is definitely felt with Run. Run is probably one of my favorite songs off of this. Just the use of the strings to create such a great sound. It's almost like a dark light. In that sense, the atmosphere is so tangible. It's really hard not to get sucked in. Up until this point, I've even realized there's not a whole lot of like traditional percussion, or maybe to structure that a little bit better, the percussion is much more traditional in this type of orchestrated sound. It's not like a whole drum kit just kind of blasting away. It's much more, they're using just the bass drums, and that was another thing that I also noticed. Like, there's no bass guitar or real bass grounding, so all the grounding that's being done is being done with, say, like the bigger stringed instruments, or just kind of like kettle drums with a very muted percussive strike. And it provides such a really interesting sound, and this is definitely felt on Rulers. And I think this is where Christian really comes in and really shows his understanding of what's needed for a particular song. And as I was talking earlier in this review about the songs kind of reminding me of more popular songs, the purely instrumental track of Snow reminds me of Wrecking Ball a little bit, as if Wrecking Ball was a little bit more subdued, less bombastic in your face, and more intimate. That's definitely the essence that I felt on this. And every time I was listening to this, it kind of reminded me of that same note progression. Like, it's very, very similar. And then we come into one of my favorite songs, which is Storm Horses. This song gives me chills. The build-ups that we have is very akin to a build-up that, say, Steve Hackett would use or employ. And it keeps kind of going down through a valley and then start to lift up and start to lift up. And that really, really big sound that we get at the end is just so crystallized and so tangible. It's such a great treat once we get to the end. And the album does a very good job of closing off with the last two tracks of Silver Paradise and Everything in Its Right Place. Both of these songs don't really do too much, or at least add anything new at this point, but it does a great job of closing everything off. So overall, I really, really enjoyed this album, and one that I was very blown away with. I do have a few criticisms, and it's more of just my own personal thoughts. The album doesn't really have a whole lot of wiggle room. Like, I am enjoying the landscape and the environment, but outside of meeting the new creatures that come out, I'm not really exploring too much of the landscape. And after multiple listens, it is hard to kind of differentiate many of the songs, and I feel as though the lasting impact of this album isn't going to be that great after a couple of years. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that this album grows to mature very beautifully. And I have a feeling it might, but I also worry if there's not a whole lot that will be seen after the fact. But overall, I still love this album, and one I highly recommend for anybody. Anybody can come in off the street and really appreciate something that's on this album. I have to say, go out, pick this up on physical format if you can find it. It is a fantastic addition to anybody's musical discography. So that's about it. What did you guys think of Mayra's Orchestra Oracle? And actually, now that I think about it, Oracle is a very, very good title for this overall piece of work, because it does feel like we're almost getting a glimpse into the future in some sense of the word. Anyway, what did you guys think of this? If you haven't had a listen, definitely do so, and let me know of your own thoughts by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best, and until next time, notes out.